and 20 more. All right, everybody, let's get started. Let's call the meeting of the Forensic Science Board to order. I remind everyone that the meeting is being recorded. First of all, can everybody hear me who's listening? Anybody who cannot hear me? Okay, take it as a yes. And remind everybody that the meeting is being recorded, and ask everyone to mute your microphone when you're not speaking. Let's welcome Nancy Barterson. Ms. Barterson, you here? Secretary of the SAC. Again, I remind everyone that when they speak, they should state their name beforehand so that Ms. Barterson has that information for the purpose of the minutes. Ms. Barterson, would you please take a roll call to confirm who is present? Introductions.
Maggie DeBoard.
Maggie DeBoard is here.
Les Edinburgh.
Here.
Senator John Edwards.
Here. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Yeah. All right.
William Gormley.
Present.
Carl Hayes.
Here.
Delegate Charnel Herring.
Here.
Kristen Howard.
Here.
Caroline Duran.
Here.
David Lett.
Present.
Colette McKeaton. Rich Myers.
Here.
Megan Peterson.
Here.
Tracy Rusulo.
Here.
Denise Tony.
Here.
Hollywood.
Here.
Mr. Chair, a majority of the SFB members are present.
All right, that means we have a quorum. The board is present. Next item is the adoption of the agenda. Members should have received a link for the draft agenda from Ms. Barterson. I ask for a motion to adopt the draft agenda. I remind members to state their name before making or seconding the motion.
Les Edinburgh, so moved.
Second.
Second.
Ms. Patterson? Take a roll call on the vote, please.
Yes, sir. Colonel DeBoard.
Maggie DeBoard, yes.
Ms. Peterson.
Megan Peterson, yes.
Dr. Edinburgh.
Yes.
Senator Edwards.
Senator Edwards here. Yes.
Dr. Gormley.
Bill Gormley, yes.
Mr. Hayes.
Carl Hayes, yes.
Delegate Herring.
Delegate Herring, yes.
Ms. Howard.
Kristen Howard, yes.
Ms. Duran.
Caroline Duran, yes.
Chairman Lett.
Yes?
Ms. McKeaton. Mr. Myers.
Yes.
Lieutenant Colonel Rusillo.
Tracy Rusillo, yes.
Dr. Tony.
Denise Tony, yes.
Ms. Wood.
Hollywood, yes.
Mr. Chair, the motion passes.
Okay. Note that the agenda has been adopted. Item number 3 is the draft minutes from the January the 6th meeting. Ms. Barterson has previously shared those draft minutes with you. Ask if there are any proposed changes to the minutes. Appear to be no amendments. Ask for a motion to approve the draft minutes from the previous meeting. Is there a motion?
Maggie
Delegate
DeBoard, so
Herring.
moved.
Delegate Herring, second.
Ms. Barterson, would you take a roll call vote, please?
Colonel DeBoard.
Maggie DeBoard, yes.
Ms. Peterson,
Megan Peterson, yes.
Dr. Edinburgh,
West Edinburgh, yes.
Senator Edwards,
Yes.
Dr. Gormley,
Bill Gormley, yes.
Mr. Hayes,
Carl Hayed, yes.
Delegate Herring,
Delegate Hearing, yes.
Ms. Howard,
Kristen Howard, yes.
Ms. Juren,
Caroline Juren, yes.
Chairman Lett,
Yes.
Mr. Myers,
Rich Myers, yes.
Lieutenant Colonel Rosillo,
Tracy Rosillo, yes.
Dr. Tony,
Denise Tony, yes.
Ms. Wood.
Hollywood, yes.
Mr. Chairman, the motion passes.
Okay. Note that the meeting minutes have been approved. The next item on the agenda is the board's chair report. And we're going to skip past that. Okay, there's nothing to report in that area anyway. We'll go to number 5. Director Lenny Jackson, DFS Director's Report.
Thank you, Chairman Lett. Let me share my screen. Come on. All right, hopefully the slides are on your screen, but if they are not, they are also posted in the meeting materials, which can be found on our website, and the link is on this slide. All right, so I just wanted to update on things that have been happening at the department since we last met in January. Obviously, we're still dealing with the pandemic. We have been maintaining our examination capabilities in all of our laboratories. There have been occasional closures of a section or a laboratory for cleaning, but in general, we have been keeping everything moving. We have developed the capability to do the disinfection of laboratory spaces and offices internally, so that certainly minimizes the amount of time necessary for closures because we don't have to wait for a vendor to be able to come on site. We are continuing to encourage our staff to work alternative work schedules and to telework where possible. Most scientific staff are able to telework about 1 day a week, and that just helps minimize the population in the laboratory at any one time. But now that courts have reopened, we are having our examiners traveling to court, and so obviously they need to do that during the times when court is being held. Our breath alcohol program, as you know, we own and maintain and calibrate and certify the breath alcohol instruments that are placed throughout the Commonwealth. And before the pandemic began, we were on track for having a comparable, if not a slightly increased volume of breath tests that were being run in the field. But since March of 2020, the number of breath tests that are being run has been significantly lower, as you can see from the graph below. And that has not, that continues to be low. In general, looking at our workload statistics comparing the first quarter of calendar year 2020, so that's January through March of 2020 versus January through March of 2021, there are some significant differences in the case submissions that are impacting our workload. 2 sections are receiving less cases significantly. particularly the controlled substances section. You can see that there's a 24% decrease between the first quarter of 2020 versus 2021. And that has been consistent throughout the pandemic. And so because drugs and drug cases are a high volume section with submissions, having a 24% drop, you can see that we have gone from having over 9,000 cases submitted in those 3 months to just under 7,000, which is a significant change to the workload. And you can see that that has allowed us to catch up significantly with our backlog. So our backlog and turnaround times in our controlled substances section, which is an area that we had been focused on. Sorry, not sure why it automatically forwarded, but this is an area that we had been working on. We had received additional staff to be able to have the correct capacity to work the cases that were coming in the door, because after the opioid crisis had begun, we had been receiving approximately 10% more drug cases each year throughout the opioid crisis. So this drop in submissions means that we now are slightly overstaffed in controlled substances, but since we're not sure what the impact will be long term, we are trying to maintain that capability for drug testing, but we do have a couple of folks in drugs that are currently helping in toxicology, and we have someone who's also helping in firearms, trying to utilize our resources well. We can't have people just switch sections and begin working cases because they have not been through the appropriate training. And as you recall, the training period for scientific positions is very long, but they are able to go and help with other support duties, evidence transfers, and other laboratory support, which is helpful. It then allows the people who are trained to focus on other areas. There are some sections that have seen an increase in the number of cases that we are receiving. In particular, although you can't see it on from the past quarter, firearms and tool marks, we are receiving a significant number of additional firearms for examination and cartridge cases and bullets for examination, as well as additional toxicology cases. And I will talk about that a little more in a moment. But you can see that our backlog in firearms and tool marks has increased significantly over the past year. So the thing that our customers are most interested in is how long are the cases taking from when they are submitted until when they receive the certificate of analysis or the report. And so we do post that on our website. The average turnaround time for cases that were worked in the previous month. So this is on our website, and it is the average case turnaround time for all the cases that were completed in March of 2021. And so you can see that the drug cases has dropped significantly down to an average of 21 days. And that is the case. That is the case for all 4 of our laboratories. Firearms, forensic biology, latent prints, and digital and multimedia evidence are all over 100 days. And so that is something to continue to focus on. Toxicology also has increased. Generally, it is best if the turnaround time in toxicology hovers around 40 days. The turnaround time in toxicology is a little bit complicated to think about because it's a mixture of cases that only require alcohol analysis, which is very fast, and compared to cases that might have a lot of different or several different drugs that need to be quantified and identified, which takes much longer. And so that is a little higher than we would like as well. So just to look a little into some of those sections where the turnaround times are increased. In toxicology, we have had an increase in the number of submissions. So you can see here it's a total of 9% in calendar year 20 over calendar year 19. And that includes both cases from the medical examiner due to increases in deaths, but also driving under the influence of drugs. We do have some staffing issues in particular our central laboratory. We have 4 people who are in training, which is a significant portion of our staff. And so we have worked with the Office of the Chief Medical Examiner to use some of our drug outsourcing funds to be able to outsource toxicology cases. So they are sending, there's some central medical examiner cases directly to an outsourcing lab so that they can assist us and help us while we are trying to train our folks. But this is something that we need to continue to look at, the staffing model for toxicology as submissions continue to increase. The same with firearms. The increase in submissions in firearms is significant. So I know it didn't show, there was not an increase in that first quarter, but if you look at how many firearms cases were submitted in calendar year 20 versus calendar year 19, there was an increase of 13%. So we do have 3 examiners that are in training and 1 in the hiring process. So we do have, out of 23 examiners across the state, that is a fairly large chunk of our staff who are in training and therefore not contributing to casework that is being done. However, it seems that more and more firearms cases are being submitted to the laboratory for both NIBIN, the database that can link cartridge cases together, analysis, as well as firearms comparison. So that is another thing that we are actively looking at for the appropriate staffing model. Because in particular in firearms, a lot of times the information that's gained from the examinations is used in the investigation and not just for down the road court proceedings. And so therefore having turnaround times of over 100 days can significantly hamper an investigation. With latent prints, we are fully staffed. We do have 2 forensic scientists who just very recently completed training and are now contributing to working cases. And we still have 2 that are in training in latent prints and 1 who is training in impressions for shoe and tire marks. We got very good news this week about our central laboratory capital project. Earlier in this calendar year, the preliminary drawings were submitted to DEB at the Department of General Services, and all of the comments that the DEB reviewers had, they worked with our project team, our architects and such, and those comments were successfully addressed. The project then went for funding consideration because once the project was, the scope of the project was approved, the funding needed to be reevaluated because the funding for the building project was initially approved, the dollar amount was initially approved back in 2014 when it was a renovation expansion project. So obviously changing from renovation expansion to building a whole new building is a different scope of work, as well as the fact that the costs for building in general have changed in the 7 years since that funding was initially approved. And so we were just advised that the project had been funded and that we are going to receive the funding that we requested to build the building as was approved by the DEB reviewers. And so although we are about 12 weeks behind where our kind of best case scenario schedule would be, it does leave us in a space where it should still be possible to break ground before the end of 2021, which is very exciting. And again, just for your recollection, the site of the building is outside of the city of Richmond. It is in Hanover County, right off of 295, near 95. So it's very near all the major highways, so that it is easy for our customers to get to us. Just to report on where we are with our scientific accreditation, we are currently preparing for our off-site surveillance visit. This is where it's basically a paper audit where we are submitting a lot of materials to an assessor for review. And so we have submitted all of our materials and are waiting for word on what else we need to provide for review, but it is scheduled this May, so that is coming up. Our certificates of accreditation and scopes are posted on our website. The scopes, they're separate documents, and the scope actually lists out which kinds of testing are covered by our accreditation. The one test that we do, we've always tried to have all of our tests be covered so that there was not a question about what was covered and what was not. But that we do have one test right now that we perform that is outside of our scope, and that is trigger pull for firearms. And we are evaluating our uncertainty of measurement with that particular examination. And once we have finished that calculation, we will put in for an expansion of scope to have that re-added into our accreditation umbrella. So if a trigger pull is done right now, it will be noted on our certificate that it is outside of our scope, so that the users of the report will know where that stands. It's been an interesting year with the pandemic for our forensic training section. This is the section that provides training directly to law enforcement on our capabilities and on crime scene examination. So our kind of flagship program, the Forensic Science Academy, we did only have to cancel one of our sessions last year, and all the folks that were, or most all of the folks that were in that canceled session got to come and complete in the 102nd Forensic Science Academy, which just graduated on April 1st. And you can see that we have 2 more that are scheduled, and they are all full. Katja has just, Alka is getting feedback. Hold on one second. I am turning off my camera to hopefully increase the bandwidth of the presentation. Okay. We continue to identify new compounds that are submitted to us for analysis in the novel psychoactive substances and analogs of fentanyl, those types of things that are continuing to change. So DFS recommended 6 compounds in January, and these compounds were considered by the Board of Pharmacy at their March 30th meeting, and they are pending final approval. We also just sent an additional list, I think, that had 3 compounds on it for consideration at their next meeting. I wanted to give just a very brief update on where we are with our cannabis analyses. You remember that when industrial hemp became legal, it provided a challenge to our laboratory in being able to differentiate hemp from marijuana, since they are both the cannabis plant with just differing amounts of THC present. So we did put a semi-quantitative method online for evaluating the concentration of THC on all samples that were potentially marijuana. And that went online at the beginning of 2020. And so I just kind of wanted to report on what the breakdown was of what we had received. And so in calendar year 2020, we analyzed over 8,000 or over 8,500 items, and that we reported as either marijuana or cannabis. And so this was 13% of all of our drug items that we analyzed. So you can see how much of our caseload consisted of cannabis. Of those 8,500, 7,451 of those were described as plant material and therefore were run on that semi-quantitative method so that we could differentiate whether they were marijuana or cannabis being potentially industrial hemp. And so of those, 87% had a THC value that was over our threshold, and we therefore reported them as marijuana, whereas 13% were reported as cannabis, where we could not state whether they were marijuana or industrial hemp without further testing. It is interesting to note that was about the percentage in all of the areas except for in the cases that were done by our Western lab. So in the more rural western part of the state, there were actually 21% that we reported as cannabis and only 79% that we reported as marijuana. So this semi-quantitative method that we use, we did update that at the end of 2020, and we expanded it so that we could also use it on cannabis extracts. And this was important because of the change in the law where hashish oil was no longer listed as a Schedule I substance. And so therefore, we did not have to handle those differently than plant material. And so we also changed the administrative threshold from 2% THC to 1% THC so that we would have that allows a more accurate determination of those lower levels so that really the sum total difference would be that anything that was between 1 and 2 we could now report as marijuana. And we also changed our internal standard just to make sure that we were being able to differentiate peaks for the internal standard from any of the other compounds that might be present. We're still working, although we are very close to being finished. Our validation is nearing completion of the full quantitation method for THC in plant material. Changing gears and moving to latent print analysis, I did want to go through, we had 2 policy notices that we submitted out to our customers. These were sent to Commonwealth's attorneys, to law enforcement, to the defense bar, and the Indigent Defense Commission. And so I just wanted to go over those so that you would be aware of them. The one for latent prints was reporting on some new language that we were adding to certificates of analysis when we have a potential association for latent prints that are complex in nature. So this is not for all latent prints, but just those that the examiners designate as complex, and when that association came from a database search. And so really it clarifies that the information that we're providing is an investigative lead and that the connection of the individual that was identified needs to be determined through further law enforcement investigation. And this is due to the fact that the databases now they're very large. They have many, many prints in them, and the algorithms have gotten very to where the potential for having a close non-match is higher. And so in order to assess that risk when we have a very complex print, we wanted to provide that language of caution. We also put out a notice regarding forensic biology or DNA analysis. We, along with laboratories across the country, have had a significant difficulty getting pipette tips that are needed to use our robotic systems. And that is because we are using the same robotic systems and the same pipette tips as all of the laboratories that are performing COVID testing. And so there is a shortage of even the raw materials used to make the pipette tips. And so in order to conserve pipette tips while we were in this shortage, we changed how many and what types of samples we were doing on the robotics, and then moved some of our analyses to manual. So we did have to train folks to make sure that they were all able to perform the manual extractions, but the manual extractions are more time consuming. And so we wanted to put this information out to our customers because we know that it has slowed down our analysis in the forensic biology section. And we hope this is just a temporary, and we have no reason to believe it's not just a temporary bump in the road as we wait for production to increase with these tips. So as soon as we are able, we will send out another notification that says we are moving back to robotics. One other thing that we are kind of transitioning to during this time of the pandemic is we are increasing the amount of our testimony review of examiners who are testifying in court, where we are asking parties, attorneys, to provide feedback on the performance of those experts and their testimony. And so our preference is always to have other examiners who are competent in the discipline to do that review in person, because obviously you get a lot better understanding of how someone is performing when you have someone who understands what the right technical words are to say. But now when courts are limiting the number of people that can be in the court, especially ones that are extraneous, we wanted to have this opportunity as well so that we can get this feedback that is required for our accreditation. All right, briefly, I just wanted to just touch on our budget and resources. This is our budget for the approved FY22, well, and FY21, I suppose. We did receive a few positions and increased funding in FY22. The toxicology research grant was really authorization to use an FTE and funding from a federal grant. We did receive 3 positions for admins, our admin section that we have been in dire need of, 2 IT positions and 1 financial management position who can help focus on our ARMIX state requirements, and some additional funding to have the maintenance agreements on the some of our expensive equipment that we have bought for toxicology that we are using, and we only have 1 instrument or piece of equipment in each lab, so we need to make sure that we have maintenance contracts so that we can get those fixed quickly if they go down. One of the actions that is required of this board is to approve our applications and to accept grant funding. And so we have, since your last meeting, we have applied for 2 highway safety grants that are funneled through the DMV. Those, in order for us to apply, we've gotten the appropriate approvals from the chair and the vice chair. But now that you are meeting again, we do need to ask for your approval to accept these funds if they are awarded. The first one is the funding that we have from the highway safety funds for our breath alcohol section. This allows for law enforcement officers to travel for the breath alcohol operator training and for their agencies to be reimbursed for that travel. It also covers some continuing education for our breath alcohol staff and some other odds and ends in the breath alcohol section. The second one, in case you want to act on these together, the second one is for the toxicology section, and this is for 8 lab support staff. We have had in the past 4 lab support staff that was covered by this grant. This adds an additional support person for each laboratory to bring the total to 8. And you can see here that the goal is to reduce the turnaround time for getting information to the medical examiner so that they can then provide information as quickly as possible to the DMV traffic records electronic data system, which tracks the fatalities in accidents. So I guess I'll pause and see if we could have a motion potentially to allow us to accept these funds if awarded.
Is there a motion?
Caroline Jurin, so moved.
Is there a second? Is there a second?
Delegate Herring, second.
Could we get a roll count? Ms. Patterson?
Yes, sir. Colonel DeBoard,
Maggie DeBoard, yes.
Ms. Peterson,
Megan Peterson, yes.
Dr. Edinburgh,
Yes.
Senator Edwards,
Senator Edwards, yes.
Dr. Gormley,
Bill Gormley, yes.
Mr. Hayes,
Carl Hayes, yes.
Delegate Herring,
Delegate Herring, yes.
Ms. Howard,
Kristen Howard, yes.
Ms. Jurin,
Caroline Jurin, yes.
Chairman Lett,
David Lett, yes.
Mr. Myers,
Rich Myers, yes.
Lieutenant Colonel Rosillo,
Tracy Rosillo, yes.
Dr. Tony,
Denise Tony, yes.
Ms. Wood,
Holly Wood, yes.
Mr. Chairman, motion passed.
Motion passes.
All right, thank you very much. The last thing I wanted to share was just our normal workload backlog stats that we share, and I'm not going to spend much time on these, but they are here for your review. They cover our case statistics for the past 5 quarters so that you can assess trends. All of the information for cases received is the total of cases that were received in that section for the quarter. Same with completed, it's the total number completed in the quarter. The caseload is the backlog at the end of the quarter. And just as a reminder, the department considers any case that is available to be worked. So anything that has come in the door is considered in the backlog. So there are other definitions that some laboratories use or grants use, but we just consider it our caseload. So You can certainly see that I was not kidding about the reduction in the backlog in the controlled substances section. It is a beautiful graph for me to see. Digital multimedia evidence, we also have improved significantly, although there is room to improve further. We do have a fully staffed section at this point. Firearms and tool marks, you can see the green lines are the caseload. And so you can see that the green line keeps getting bigger, which means that the turnaround times will also continue to get bigger at this point. And so that is something obviously to consider, continue to work on moving forward to assess what our actual capacity needs to be for being able to do the work that is now coming in the door. Forensic biology, you can also see that the backlog is going up a little bit, the green line. This is really due to the change to manual extractions, and so hopefully this will be a bump in the road. Latent prints, the backlog has actually been going down, and hopefully as folks are exiting the training program, we should start to be in a little bit better place. Toxicology, again, this is an area that we are really working on assessing. We're trying to make sure that we understand from the medical examiner's office how many cases are being sent to the outsourcing lab right now so that we can use that to assess how many staff members we need to be able to actually get their analyses done in a timely manner. The medical examiner is very interested in us having quick turnaround time in toxicology because our turnaround time affects their accreditation. They have to have their autopsies done within 90 days or 90% of them done within 90 days. And so if we don't have the toxicology back to them in enough time for them to use those results to assess for their death certificates, they will not have their statistics that allow them to meet that accreditation criteria. So this is something that I know is near and dear to Dr. Gormley's heart as well. In trace evidence, we have a couple of people who are finishing some training on additional subdisciplines in this section. We have someone training in tape and someone, I believe, training in fibers. But we are at full staff in the trace evidence section. And that is all I had to share with you, and I appreciate your willingness to work with us, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have.
And Mr. Chair, it's Charnel Hearing. Mr. Chair?
Yes?
As delegate Hearing, I did have just one question.
Yes, go ahead, please.
Thank you. Just before the budget slide, there was you had a slide talking about a testimony and review. I just want to make sure that is that given to both defense and prosecution?
That is the plan. Yes, for it to go to both parties.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other questions? Thank you, Director Jackson. Thank you so much for your presentation.
This is Dr. Gormley. I don't have a question, but I do have a comment.
I'm sorry, who's speaking?
It's Dr. Gormley.
Yes, sir.
I don't have a question, but I do have a comment that unlike the submissions to controlled substances, the death rate for illicit drugs has dramatically increased during the COVID thing. So the previous epidemic is continuing and actually accelerating. So that we have plenty of data that can be used to help justify maintaining that controlled substance resource.
Thank you, sir. Any other comments? Any other questions on that subject? Okay, thank you, Director Jackson. We're going to move forward. Next item on the agenda is from the Scientific Advisory Committee. Richard Myers is the chair. I'm going to ask Mr. Myers if he'll present the Scientific Advisory Committee report.
All righty. Good morning, everyone. So yesterday, the Scientific Advisory Committee held an electronic meeting. 2021.
We lost
Director
you.
Jackson provided an agent.
Go ahead.
I'm sorry. Am I still there? Okay. So
You're freezing up a little bit.
provided
Mr.
an
Myers.
agency up. Okay.
Go ahead, start again, please, sir.
Okay. So on April 20th, 2021, the Scientific Advisory Committee met and Director Jackson provided an agency update. Alcaloman presented a Division of Technical Services update, and the program managers provided updates for their respective program areas. In advance of that meeting, the toxicology subcommittee members had been provided with a method development summary and a validation plan for the toxicology section's method for barbiturate quantitation and confirmation by liquid-liquid extraction using LC. And the subcommittee reviewed the materials. We didn't need an extra meeting to provide any comments back to the department, so we incorporated that into yesterday's meeting. So Dr. Hutching did the full Scientific Advisory Committee with an overview of the method development summary and validation plan, and the committee closed its review. Also of note is that all of the program areas have methods that are in development or undergoing validation, and as a result, the Scientific Advisory Committee anticipates that several subcommittees will have to meet in October to discuss documentation for our next meeting. And the next meeting of the Scientific Advisory Committee is scheduled for our 2021. And that concludes my report.
Are there any questions or comments on that area? All right, we'll move forward. Item number 7, old business. We'll call on Ms. Jenkins to report on the periodic review of regulations. Ms. Jenkins.
Good morning, Mr. Chair. I'm Amy Jenkins. I'm counsel for the Department of Forensic Science. We are in the midst of a periodic review, and I sent to you all last week a overview of that review and what was required, but don't worry if you haven't had an opportunity to read it. We'll walk you through it this morning. I am going to display a couple things for you. The first is I think it's always helpful for the board to know where their regulatory power comes from, and the legislature has to give a grant of power in order to adopt and promulgate regulations, and the board's comes from 9.11110, which is part of the department's executive powers, and the board's functions are listed there, and you see in item 1 that the board has the power to adopt any regulations that are needed, and those sections translate out to the blood sample transmissions, anything related to breath alcohol, anything related to the field test admissibility in court for drug offenses, and 19.2310.5 deals with the DNA data bank. Historically, the board has not been overly promulgating regulations. They stick basically to those subject matters, which actually is quite good for board attorneys and for the department counsel. We actually have no regs on the blood transmission sections, and that's because I think the code is so specific about those sections, no additional regs are really needed. In looking at and I'm going to go back, so I'm going to stop sharing here for a second. Yeah. me see if I'm flipping over. Are y'all able to see now the administrative code sections or no? I'm thinking not.
Hollywood, no.
Okay. All right, I'm going to stop presenting and flip back. All right, so the specific regulations that we do have in place and the review that has to take place is dealing with the Virginia Administrative Code sections 40-20 through 40-60. 40-11 is the participatory public participation guidelines, and those are not part of this review. Under Governor Northam's Executive Order 14 and the code section, which is 2.24017, the board needs to review the regulations to determine their economic impact on small businesses, and also the continued need for the rule, the nature of any complaints or comments received, the complexity of the regulation and if they're appropriate, and the extent to which it overlaps or duplicates anything, and the length of time since the reg has been evaluated. So as we begin to walk through each one of these, and I'm going to go back now again to the administrative code. There you see when we deal with 40-20, we're dealing with the regulations for breath alcohol testing. And as we go through those, the breath alcohol testing regs have dealt with the process and procedures, the approval of the breath test instrument, which is our ECIR2, and how that is published and the public is notified of that. The methods for those, the licensing procedures for the operators, and then it also deals with the PBTs, which are the roadside devices that the officers use. That has been in place for quite some time. There's not been any significant change to the technology, although the department has looked at, and I know you all have heard about us talking about an enhancement to the current ECIR2. We are not in a place right now where we're able to proceed with that. So while there may need to be some amendments to these regs should we move on to another instrument for breath testing, currently, these are working quite well. There is really no impact on, or no adverse impact on small businesses, because if they have developed a PBT device or they develop an instrument that we would consider as part of an invitation for bid if we were to purchase new instruments, they are still eligible to submit those, and there's no fees assessed on the approval of those devices that would adversely impact a small business. So at this point in time, my recommendation would be that there is no change to this regulation, and that it continue as is, given that the board is required to approve these or set these regs out for the department, and they are working quite well at this point in time. The second regulation deals with the approval of field tests for the detection of drugs. This is the reg that we just amended as part of about an 18-month process, and that was amended to allow for the presumptive instruments to be utilized as well, the mobile instruments to be utilized as well. The only fee as far as impact to a small business would be the $2,500 that was assessed for the instruments. And then there's also a small fee assessed for the packets, which currently we are not, the chemical field tests, which we're currently not really being utilized by the law enforcement officers as much. The $2,500 fee is based on the cost of these instruments currently is $15,000 to $20,000. As you all might recall, as we took that reg through approval, and that's based on the time and effort spent by the staff in reviewing the instrument and testing the instrument. And then the submitter would also be required to pay for the preparation of the street drug that is used for the testing as well. So those things I think are fairly well capped, and we have just gone through all of that approval process, and I would recommend no change to that regulation as well. Moving on to Chapter 40, which deals with the arrestee law for DNA. This, we would be looking at recommending an amendment. You all might recall we were looking at DNA pre-log and the pre-log of these samples coming into play, but we have not been able to proceed with that because statutory changes would need to be made to eliminate the term of the use of lids in the statute. We were not able to introduce that bill this year. We would anticipate that we would be able to introduce it next year, or hope we will be able to do it next session. So that may be needed to be amended in the future, and maybe shortly after the next General Assembly session as part of a legislative mandate. But as it is right now, it sets out the procedures. It's been working quite well as far as the receipt of the DNA samples for the violent felonies and burglaries for arrestees. And we also have a good process in place working with the Virginia State Police for clearing those samples if the individual is not convicted of the violent felony, or if there is a null pros or dismissal of the charge for whatever reason. So I would recommend no change currently on this regulation as well. Chapter 50 deals with the approval of the marijuana field tests. And as you look through the definitions section, it makes a reference to marijuana that currently is not going to be in existence in 18.2247. That is moving to another code provision as part of the new legislation that is being signed by the governor today. And in addition, on the next section, it also makes a reference to 18.2250.1 that is also going to change as of July 1. So we would have a recommendation that this be amended. It will be a legislative mandate, so I think we'll be able to reflect that in the paperwork that's going for the periodic review because of the changes, significant changes in the law that have been made. We will still be approving marijuana field tests, although the definition of marijuana field tests in this section talks about Deconoy-Levine field tests. And as you all are aware from what we've had ongoing, the Deconoy-Levine field test can distinguish marijuana from other plant material, but it cannot distinguish marijuana from hemp. And the 4AP test was approved by the department and distributed by the department, although it wasn't listed as an approved marijuana field test for the use by law enforcement to distinguish marijuana from hemp. The thought process is that we might want to remove the Deconoy-Levine portion of this and also consider some technological advances that might occur that would enable law enforcement to have one field test that would be able to distinguish marijuana from hemp and distinguish marijuana from other plant material in the same field test. So we'll be looking at the change to this, and I would recommend an amendment be recommended by the board for this regulation. And then the final statutory set regulatory set that we have is the DNA data bank regulations. These deal with who has access to that information in the data bank, and it comes out of most of the statutory language for the data bank establishment and how it's maintained by the department. There have been no real issues with the operation of this. It has no impact on small businesses because it only deals with how information is requested from the data bank and how we provide hits to other forensic laboratories and information on convicted offenders out of the data bank or arrestees out of the data bank on those hits, as well as out-of-state lab exams, those types of things. So, and also deals with the exchange of information with the Virginia Department of Corrections, the Department of State Police, and the Department of Juvenile Justice that's required under the statutes as well. So I would not recommend any changes to this at this point in time. I think it is well within what is required of us under the statute and is an appropriate regulatory exercise by the board. So those are the walkthrough, all of the regulations that are currently under periodic review. Well, what I would request from the board members, if it was so inclined, is a motion to change or amend 4050, but to leave the rest of the regulations that are under review as no change. And with the approval of that by the board, I'll prepare the paperwork to go into the town hall and the Virginia Register for that regulatory review. It will need to go on and be reviewed by the Attorney General's office and the Governor's office as part of the periodic review process.
Is that 4050?
4050 needs to be amended. The recommendation is that the rest of the regs remain the same.
Is there a motion to amend 4050? Is there such a motion?
Hollywood, motion to amend 4050.
Is there a second?
Charnel Herring, second.
Ms. Patterson, would you take a roll call count for us, please?
Colonel DeBoard,
Maggie DeBoard, yes.
Ms. Peterson,
Megan Peterson, yes.
Dr. Edinburgh,
West Edinburgh, yes.
Senator Edwards,
Senator Edwards, yes.
Dr. Gormley,
Bill Gormley, yes.
Mr. Hayes,
Carl Hayes, yes.
Delegate Herring,
Delegate Herring, yes.
Ms. Howard,
Kristen Howard, yes.
Ms. Duran,
Caroline Jurin, yes.
Chairman Lett,
David Lett, yes.
Mr. Myers,
Rich Myers, yes.
Lieutenant Colonel Rosillo,
Tracy Rosillo, yes.
Dr. Tony,
Denise Tony, yes.
Ms. Wood.
Hollywood, yes.
Mr. Chairman, motion passed.
Motion passes. Thank you.
Thank you.
Ms. Jenkins, any other questions of Ms. Jenkins? Any comments, questions at all? All right, let's move on. The next item of business is new business, legislative updates. Ms. Herndon.
Good morning.
Good
I'm going
morning.
to share my screen. Please, if you would just confirm you're able to see it in just a second. Oops. Are you able to hear me and see my screen?
I can hear you.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. So we did not have any agency bills this past session, but there were a couple of bills of interest to the department that we did want to share with you. At this point, I'm sure everyone is aware that marijuana legalization bills passed this session. Your colleague, Leader Herring, carried the House version of the bill, House Bill 2312, and then Senators Eben and Lucas were the chief co-patrons for the Senate version of the bill, Senate Bill 1406. I think the final versions of these bills were 283 pages long, so I'm not going to attempt to present a comprehensive overview of the legislation, but I did want to point out a few provisions that are relevant to our agency. So the bills amend the Hemp Act and create new definitions for hemp product intended for smoking and also for hemp testing laboratories. The Board of Agriculture and Consumer Services is tasked with regulating hemp products intended for smoking, and then the Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services will be responsible for licensing hemp testing laboratories. The bills also make VDACs responsible for regulating edible marijuana products. And although they will be regulated by VDACs, edible marijuana product is defined in the new Cannabis Control Act, and the Cannabis Control Board is tasked with establishing the maximum THC levels or tetrahydrocannabinol levels for edible marijuana products. So the bills divide Title 4.1 into two subdivisions. The Alcohol Beverage Control Act, which is currently Title 4.1, becomes a subdivision. And then there's the newly created Cannabis Control Act. The Cannabis Control Act creates a licensing structure for the cultivation, manufacture, and wholesale and retail sale of retail marijuana and retail marijuana products. The new act creates the Cannabis Control Authority, and the authority includes a board of directors that is tasked with promulgating regulations to address possession, sale, transportation, distribution, and delivery of retail marijuana and retail marijuana products. The authority also includes a Cannabis Public Health Advisory Council, which is an advisory council to the board, and it is charged with assessing and monitoring public health issues related to marijuana and marijuana legalization, and also with making recommendations regarding health warnings, safety of retail marijuana and retail marijuana products, and public health awareness and related resource needs. The council is also specifically tasked with monitoring changes in drug use data related to marijuana and marijuana legalization. The director of DFS is one of 21 members on the Cannabis Public Health Advisory Council. So Linda will serve as a member of the advisory council once it is created. And we'll also be able to share our data on marijuana cases from both our controlled substances and toxicology sections. So these are three of the main criminal civil offense provisions related to possession of retail marijuana and retail marijuana products. But please keep in mind that these are just a small portion of the offenses included in the bill. 4.1 1100 allows persons 21 and older to possess up to 1 ounce of marijuana. Possession of greater than an ounce is a civil offense with a $25 civil penalty that is actually prepayable. Possession of more than a pound by someone who is not a licensee is a felony offense punishable by 1 to 10 years and a fine of up to $250,000. 4.1 1101 allows persons 21 and older to cultivate up to 4 plants for personal use at their main residence. The plants must be kept out of sight. They have to be tagged and protected from being accessed by underage individuals. And the limit on 4 plants is actually also a limit per household. Possession of over 4 plants but less than 10 is a civil offense with a penalty of up to $250 for a first offense. And then the offense levels increase for subsequent offenses and also as the number of plants increase, with over 100 plants or with possession of over cultivating over 100 plants being a felony offense that's punishable by 1 to 10 years and a fine of up to $250,000. The last offense I wanted to talk about was 4.1 1105.1, which is the offense prohibiting persons under 21 from consuming or possessing marijuana. It is punishable by a civil penalty of up to $25. And when a court finds a person under 21 in violation, the court is required to send the person to a substance abuse treatment or education program or to both. So these are a few procedural statutes from the bills that I wanted to point out. 4.1 1302 is a provision in the Cannabis Control Act that provides that law enforcement cannot stop, search, or seize any person based solely on the odor of marijuana. And it also prohibits search warrants from being issued based on the smell of marijuana. So any resulting evidence discovered is required to be suppressed. And this is not an entirely new provision. Similar language was added to 18.2.250.1, which is the simple possession of marijuana statute. That language was added during last year's special session. The provision from the special session went into effect on March 20th of this year, so we haven't really seen yet what the impact will be to submissions to our laboratory, but we'll have to kind of wait and see how it impacts our submissions. The other two provisions on the slide add language to the Cannabis Control Act that is similar to what is currently included in the Alcohol Beverage Control Act. So 4.1 1310 makes the certificates of analysis of our scientists admissible in any criminal or civil proceeding. And then 4.1 1311 provides that a label on a sealed container of any retail marijuana or any retail marijuana product is prima facie evidence of the marijuana content of the container. So the bills also amend the code section that specify the duties of the department to reflect that the department is responsible for determining the proper method for detecting the concentration of tetrahydrocannabinol in substances for the purposes of the Drug Control Act, and also for purposes of the chapter in the Cannabis Control Act that contains the new civil offenses related to retail marijuana and retail marijuana products. This language is similar to existing language that was previously in another code section, so it's really just moving that language into the DFS statute. The bills also amend 19.2.188.1, which is the statute that permits law enforcement officers to testify to the results of field tests approved by the department pursuant to its regulations. The statute currently permits officers to testify to the results of marijuana field tests at preliminary hearings for felonies and at trial for simple possession of marijuana. The code section 19.2.188.1 is set forth in the bills twice with two different enactment clauses. So if I've read the enactment clauses correctly, effective July 1, the statute would be amended to allow officers to testify to the results of marijuana field tests at trial for violations of 4.1.1105.1, which again is the provision that prohibits persons under 21 from consuming or possessing marijuana. However, as Amy discussed during her presentation, we're looking at amending the marijuana field test regs because they currently only allow for the approval of the Duquesnoy-Levine field tests, and the Duquesnoy-Levine field tests cannot distinguish between hemp and marijuana. So there is currently no single field test that DFS has determined to be accurate and reliable at determining whether plant material is marijuana. So the only other bill I wanted to talk about is the Schedule 1 bill. As a reminder, the compounds that we recommend to the Board of Pharmacy that are scheduled via regulation remain in the regulation for a period of 18 months and then they drop off. So each year a bill is introduced to permanently schedule in the code those compounds placed in Schedule 1 or 2 via the Board of Pharmacy's regulatory process. This year that bill was Senate Bill 1464, which was carried by Senator Newman. It permanently places 24 compounds in Schedule 1, 4 synthetic opioids, 12 research chemicals, and 8 cannabinoid agents. So that is my legislative update. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Are there any questions or comments? Any questions or comments? All right. More new business. It's the election of the chair and the vice chair. In accordance with the bylaws, the terms of the chair and the vice chair are 1 year. So where we are at this point is that we're selecting a new chair and a new vice chair. As for chair, are there any nominations for the position of chair?
Mr. Chair, this is Kristen Howard. I would like to nominate Shannon Dion. It's my understanding that even though she's not present at today's meeting, which I guess is fun for her to be nominated when she's not here, but it's my understanding that she is willing and able to serve as the next chair and would like to nominate her.
Okay. Now let's ask the pertinent questions. Can we nominate her without her being here?
Sure.
Yes, yes.
Yes.
Is she going to be surprised, Ms. Howard?
Mr. Chair, no, sir. It's my understanding that she is willing and able to serve and knows that we are nominating her to serve today.
Okay. Any other nominations?
Move the nominations be closed.
Motion to close the nominations?
Second, Charnel Herring.
Roll call vote. For
Mr. Chair, this is Kasia. Could you get a second to the motion for Ms. Howard's nomination of Shannon Dion as chair?
Need a second, please. Is there a second?
This is Caroline Turin.
We have a second. All right, roll call vote.
Colonel DeBoer,
Maggie DeBoer, yes.
Ms. Peterson,
Megan Peterson, yes.
Dr. Edinburgh,
West Edinburgh, yes.
Senator Edwards,
Senator Edwards, yes.
Dr. Gormley,
Bill Gormley, yes.
Mr. Hayes,
Carl Hayes, yes.
Delegate Herring,
Delegate Herring, yes.
Ms. Howard,
Kristen Howard, yes.
Ms. Juren,
Caroline Turin, yes.
Chairman Lett,
Chairman Lett, yes.
Mr. Myers,
Rich Myers, yes.
Lieutenant Colonel Rosillo,
Tracy Rosillo, yes.
Dr. Tony,
Denise Tony, yes.
Ms. Wood.
Hollywood, yes.
Mr. Chairman, motion passed.
Motion carries. Shannon Dion will be our new chair. And vice chair. Are there any nominations for vice chair?
Mr. Chair, this is Rich Myers, and
Yeah.
I nominate Colonel Maggie DeWard for the vice chair.
Is there a second?
Second.
Are there any other nominations? The motion to close the nominations?
Mr. Chairman, I'm sorry, who was the second on that motion?
Senator Edwards.
Thank you.
The motion to close the nominations?
Caroline Turin, so moved.
A second?
Second.
Bill Gormley, second.
Nominations closed. Could we have a roll call vote, please?
Colonel DeBoard,
I guess I should say yes.
Ms. Peterson,
Megan Peterson, yes.
Dr. Edinburgh,
Les Edinburgh, yes.
Senator Edwards,
Les Edwards, yes.
Dr. Gormley,
Bill Gormley, yes.
Mr. Hayes,
Carl Hayed, yes.
Delegate Herring,
Delegate Hearing, yes.
Ms. Howard,
Kristen Howard, yes.
Ms. Jurin,
Caroline Turin, yes.
Chairman Lett,
David Lett, yes.
Mr. Myers,
Rich Myers, yes.
Lieutenant Colonel Rosillo,
Tracy Rosillo, yes.
Dr. Tony,
Denise Tony, yes.
Ms. Wood.
Hollywood, yes.
Mr. Chairman, motion passed.
Motion passed. We have a new chairman and a new vice chairman. Move on to the next issue is public comment. Is there anyone in the audience or listening who would like to have any comment? Anybody listening that can, has a comment, question, concern? Anybody from the public? Hearing no response, we'll move on. Item 10.
Chairman Lett,
Yes?
this is Linda Jackson, and I know I know that I'm not technically a member of the public, but I did want to take a quick opportunity to thank you for your work on the board and for serving as chair as you are rolling off. And this is your last meeting. And also Colette McKeechin, who has also served as chair during her time on the board for her work supporting our agency. I really appreciate your willingness to work with us and help us achieve excellence. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you so much. Item 10, confirm the future meetings. Wednesday, July the 14th. And the next one is Thursday, October the 14th. I'll say those again. Next meetings will be Wednesday, July the 14th, and Thursday, October 14th. All right. And that concludes the agenda. Is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
To adjourn. Was it a motion to adjourn?
Senator Edwards moves to adjourn.
Is there a second?
Les Edinburgh, second.
Ms. Patterson, you take a roll call vote, please.
Colonel DeBoard,
Colonel DeBoard, yes.
Ms. Peterson,
Megan Peterson, yes.
Dr. Edinburgh,
West Edinburgh, yes.
Senator Edwards,
Senator Edwards, yes.
Dr. Gormley,
Bill Gormley, yes.
Mr. Hayes,
Carl Hayes, yes.
Delegate Herring,
Delegate Hearing, yes.
Ms. Howard,
Kristen Howard, yes.
Ms. Duran, excuse me,
Caroline Duran, yes.
Chairman Lett,
David Lett, yes.
Mr. Myers,
Rich Myers, yes.
Lieutenant Colonel Russillo,
Tracy Russillo, yes.
Dr. Tony,
Denise Tony, yes.
Ms. Wood.
Hollywood, yes.
Mr. Chairman, motion passed.
Meeting is adjourned. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.